It's now been over a decade since Arkham Knight was released, and for better or worse, this has to be the most ambitious superhero game of all time. With this game, Rocksteady didn't decide to just make another Batman title. They set out to end a series with something bigger, darker, and more cinematic than anything you've ever seen before in a superhero game. But after a decade, the question is, did these risks pay off, and does the game still hold up in 2026? Today, we're taking a full retrospective look at Batman Arkham Knight, what it got right, what it didn't, and why people are still talking about it all these years later. There will be full spoilers for the entirety of the Arkham series, so if you somehow have not played these games by now, go play them and come back. There will also be timestamps as well if you want to skip around the video, but without further ado, let's get right into it. Back in 2015, the hype for Arkham Knight was massive to say the least. Their first installment to the series, Arkham Asylum, had reinvented what a superhero game could do, and the second installment, Arkham City, is considered one of the best games of all time. So after a full 4 years of development for Arkham Knight and its promise to reinvent the series, the hype was through the roof. It was marketed as the grand finale and the ultimate Batman experience with the biggest Gotham they had ever created. The initial trailers showcased just how amazing this game looked, and it still really holds up today with the insanely detailed character models, lighting, and really cool rain effects that all contributed to a really dark tone. It promised to reinvent every core mechanic, and the biggest addition was, of course, the Batmobile. The tank-style version of the Batmobile initially looked really fun, and Rocksteady based most of their marketing entirely around it. The story was also teased as this dark, psychological narrative, with Scarecrow being the main villain, and having this big threat of his fear toxin that could manipulate all the people in Gotham. To top all of that off, there was a new original villain called the Arkham Knight, who knew Batman's every move and how to take him down. They really tried hard to make the Arkham Knight's identity a big mystery, which I think was definitely a mistake, because to most fans it was very obvious that it was Jason Todd. Who else had a tragic backstory and trained side by side with Batman, and had Batman leave him for dead? But I'll get into my thoughts on the Arkham Knight later. The point still stood that it seemed like Batman had all the odds against him, with most of the villains for previous games also making a return. Batman was going to need everything he had to come out on top, and these early trailers did a great job of building up a bunch of hype for the game. The game finally released after a couple of delays on June 23, 2015, but despite the game looking great in trailers, there was a lot of controversy upon its release. The game was a complete disaster on PC, to the point where Warner Bros. Had to temporarily remove the game from Steam and offered refunds to those who had purchased the game. This followed an unfortunate trend at the time of games like Watch Dogs and Assassin's Creed Unity releasing in unplayable states. But aside from that, the Batmobile that had been so heavily advertised was a massive disappointment to many players. A lot of the missions force you to use it, and the tank combat got extremely repetitive after the first couple hours of the game. And worst of all, the boss fights that the game had become so well known for were often replaced with a Batmobile battle instead. Out of the 7 true boss fights in this game, 4 of them utilized the Batmobile, and this didn't go over well with fans. It almost felt like a slap in the face when they took characters from previous games and had amazing boss fights like Deathstroke and reduced it down to a weak tank battle. The story also rubbed a lot of people the wrong way because, for one, how obvious the identity of the Arkham Knight was, and also, surprise surprise, the Joker makes his return but only in Batman's head. A lot of fans loved the Joker but were sick of him, as he was the focal point of the last 3 games in the series. It was clear that Rocksteady had a lot of ambition for this game, but a lot of it didn't sit well with people, on top of having a horrendous PC launch. But I honestly think that while this game has some major flaws that I'll get into, it does a lot of great things too, and is one of the best games of the last generation in my opinion. Let's get things started with how the story opens. You're greeted with the scene that shows the Joker being cremated and makes the player think that that's the end of the Joker and everyone has moved on. And then after a short talk with Jim Gordon, who's played by the great Mike from Breaking Bad, you hear the words, "This is how the Batman dies." So you know things can't end with sunshine and rainbows. It establishes the dark tone. And then you got Scarecrow's fear toxin, which feels like a really serious threat. If his plan works, then the entire city will be under his control and in fear. I thought Scarecrow was the perfect choice for a main villain because his motivations are a lot more psychologically focused rather than the typical criminal stuff. His toxin he's cooked up reveals people's biggest fears, and he aims to impose fear on everyone in Gotham. Then of course you have the Arkham Knight, whose identity was obvious, but it's still really interesting to have a villain that knew Batman's every move. But despite these setbacks, I wasn't worried for a second because my god, Batman has some serious aura in this game.
The fucking aura of this man, goddamn! He's just standing there, menacingly!
Just the way he carries himself and some of the lines he drops just shows how much these enemies fear him.
Where is he?
He's gone to see the little man, the Penguin. He supplied the safe houses for the attack. The Knight's gone to pay him for his services. That's it. That's all I know.
Remember something else?
He uses a refrigeration company as a front. The trucks distribute weapons throughout the city.
What's it called?
North Refrigeration.
Thank you.
But despite all of that, Batman is exposed to some of Scarecrow's fear toxin in one of the first missions where he's trying to keep the toxin from spreading all over the city. When Batman gets exposed to the toxin, it's revealed in a big jump scare that the Joker is back. Despite being dead physically, he's now inside Batman's head. A lot of fans were livid when the Joker had returned for yet another game, and I was initially really skeptical as well. But I think they actually handle it really well. Joker's sole purpose is to annoy the living piss out of Batman everywhere he goes. And the dude is just constantly trolling him about their past and every mistake he makes. Imagine you had a guy trolling you on social media every single day, just no matter what you did, he always had a clever way to make fun of you. Realistically, you could just delete the social media and ignore the person, but in this case, the Joker is the internet troll, but Batman can't simply just delete an app. He has to hear this man troll him on his every move.
Bruce, this is your mother calling now. I just want to say... Oh, sorry. It's so funny, you know, because they're dead.
It has some good comedy in an otherwise really dark and psychological story, and it was definitely a big risk bringing the Joker back, but I think it works really well. But if that wasn't bad enough to have a thorn in your side, it's revealed that Scarecrow was just distracting Batman and he's taken Jim Gordon's daughter, Barbara, who was also helping Batman take down Scarecrow. The problem is that Jim thinks that his daughter is safe and outside the city because he was lied to. When Batman tells Jim about this, he's understandably really furious and wants nothing to do with Batman. So if the odds weren't against the Dark Knight enough, now he's lost two of his biggest allies. The entire point of the opening is just to show how powerful both Scarecrow and the Arkham Knight really are. They effortlessly kill cops and workers in the opening mission, and kidnap one of Batman's closest allies like it was nothing. Every move Batman had made played right into their plan, and you know he's really gonna have to dig deep to come out on top. It's to show that all the odds are against our hero, and the game spoils you the death of him right off the bat so you know it's gonna take everything he's got. I'll get back to the story and all my thoughts on how these plot points are executed, but I want to take a few minutes to talk about the gameplay at night, which is honestly one of the best gameplay systems I've ever experienced. Starting off with the traversal and how Batman gets around Gotham. It's a perfect system in my opinion and made some really good additions. First off, the city of Gotham is a lot bigger than previous games and the buildings were specifically designed for the traversal with big streets and tall buildings. So even though it's a massive map, getting around the city is actually fairly easy. The traversal also feels really smooth and a lot faster than previous entries. Once you get a grasp for the system, you don't really have to stop at any point. You're able to just glide throughout the entire city without giving it a second thought. It doesn't have any of the clunkiness that previous entries had either, and overall I think Rocksteady did great with it. Next you got the stealth, which is fantastic. The obvious main addition was the Fear multi-takedown system, which essentially rewards you for being good at the stealth. And after you got a couple quiet takedowns, you can do a chain takedown attack where you can take out 3 to 6 enemies depending on your upgrades. You would think that this would make the stealth way too easy, but the enemy AI is honestly a lot smarter in this game. This definitely does depend on the difficulty setting, but even playing on normal, you have to be really strategic with how you take out enemies. Enemies now have the ability to use mines, drones, thermal vision, and jammers, all to bring a whole new challenge. There's also the addition of medics that can revive downed enemies, and big brute style enemies that if you try and take down, you will alert everyone. And on top of that, there's these annoying ass drones that the second they detect you, they can almost insta-kill you, so you have to plan for those too. It was nearly impossible to use the same strategy over and over. The game constantly throws a new curveball towards you and it forces you to be innovative. But they also give you a plethora of tools to help you out. And on top of that, the gadgets they had in previous games. You have a hacking device that can temporarily disable drones and turrets, and a voice synthesizer that tricks the enemies into thinking they've received an order from their boss, but in fact it's Batman who manipulated their voice. Rocksteady was really out here in 2015 giving us hints to how AI would evolve. It's insane. And it just feels like enemies fear Batman more in this game. As you pick off enemies one by one, their boss will get increasingly more and more mad at them and the enemies get really scared and bunch up together, which provides a whole new challenge. Overall, Rocksteady took what was already great about this system and took some risks and made it better, which I think really paid off. It's a much more challenging system, but the game gives you all the tools you need. It's just up to you to strategize and find a way. Then you got the combat, which is one of the best systems I've ever seen. They take the free flow style that made the previous games in the series so great and expand upon it. The animations look a lot more natural and you're able to transition between enemies without losing momentum. The best part is, it never gets boring. Almost every mission adds a new enemy type or something else to spice it up. You have to really master the combat and be on alert at all times. It's not a simple counter, evade, and parry like most games. It's extremely fast paced and using tools like the Batclaw are actually really helpful. And on top of all that, they introduced the dual combat, which allows Batman and whoever else he's fighting with to fight together, where you can switch between them and even do dual takedowns. These other people you can play as aren't just reskins of Batman either, they each have their own unique style and weapons. Overall, I don't know how you can get a better Batman combat system than this. It takes an already great system and expands upon it, making it faster, smoother, and more in-depth. And now it's time to finally address the elephant in the room, the Batmobile. And I'm going to be honest, I don't think it's as big of a sin as a lot of fans make it out to be, but it's also far from perfect. The actual driving mechanics of the Batmobile were really good. The map was specifically designed for it, and it's fun jetting across the map with it. And I found the shooting mechanics to be really fun at first. It's a simple dodge and fire system, but gets more and more interesting as you encounter different enemy types. And lastly, I think it's integrated pretty well in some of these missions, where you have to go both on feet and in the Batmobile to advance. But the main issue is this thing is just so damn overused to the point where you're just sick of it by the end of the game. I initially loved how it was used and it really spiced up the gameplay, but once you get to the midpoint, it feels like you're doing the same dodge and fire over and over again. It gets to the point where it's used so much that this almost doesn't feel like a Batman game at times, but rather a tank combat game. I think the concept of the Batmobile was really good, and for me it was a welcomed addition at first, but the developers just came way too insistent on making it a focal point of the gameplay. Honestly, the other risks that the devs took with the gameplay really paid off, but they went way too far with the Batmobile. And it almost feels like it was forced in the game because obviously Batman doesn't kill, so they had to justify the tank by saying the enemy tanks were unmanned, and if Batman shoots someone, the bullets just knock them out, which is definitely a stretch. Overall, I think the Batmobile was a really good idea and definitely has cool moments, but this is a Batman game, not tank combat simulator at the end of the day. Up next, we got the boss fights. What a fucking letdown they were. One of the things that make the Arkham games so great are their boss fights, but if I'm being honest, only a couple of these stand out to me. A lot of people really hated the Batmobile related bosses, but I actually think those are some of the highlights here. The Cloudburst boss makes you pick your moves really carefully and time your strikes well, and the Cloudburst itself was actually really menacing. This is one of the most hated bosses in the entire series, but I was in fear for my life every time I attacked and had to run away, as a couple big shots could end the fight. Also, the fight where the Arkham Knight has a massive drill was a really well designed fight. The whole objective is for you to bait him into following you into explosives, and the chase itself got really intense at times. But other than that, the only fight that stood out was the Red Hood / Arkham Knight fight, which is honestly kind of a letdown for all the build-up his character had, just to have a stealth-based takedown fight. It was decently designed, don't get me wrong, but for the final boss fight in the game, it wasn't all that. Knight has by far the worst bosses in the entire series. The design for a lot of these fights just seemed really watered down when you compare it to all the innovation the other bosses in the series had. The only hand-to-hand combat boss the main game gives you is just an enemy with a big health bar, nothing more. It's definitely a fun boss still because you get to utilize the game's dual combat system, but outside of that, you have to collect hundreds of Riddler trophies, do hundreds of combat challenges, or buy the game's DLC to get somewhat quality bosses, which is actually insane. Now getting back to the story and how all the plot points were executed. I'm honestly really mixed on the ending. I think they did great with certain aspects, but they also fumbled some too. For starters, the Arkham Knight plotline was obvious to a lot of fans, but there was also a lot of fans that hadn't read the comics, so they had no idea who this Arkham Knight was. But the way his identity was handled makes no sense at all. Literally a couple of hours before the Knight's identity was revealed, Batman sees these visions of what really happened to Jason, but then he's somehow in shock when his identity was revealed soon after. And I get that Batman thought Jason died, but you mean to tell me, as the world's greatest detective, he didn't even consider the fact that the Arkham Knight was an old Robin? I mean, who else could have possibly known all these secrets about Batman? I once saw a group of fans say that the Arkham Knight should have been Talia from Arkham City, and while that sounds insane at first, it makes a whole lot more sense than what they decided to go with. And then worst of all, after Batman defeats Jason, it makes zero sense how Jason goes from this deep hatred of Bruce and feeling abandoned, to then immediately after saving him from Scarecrow. The Arkham Knight had a lot of potential, and I thought the concept of his character was really cool, but I think the game really fumbled his character arc and tried so hard to force the plotline in the story despite it not making a whole lot of sense. Then you got the whole plotline about Barbara being taken and then Batman thinking she died, which is honestly ridiculous. I knew from the moment she had this whole fake death that it was complete bullshit, and it makes no sense how the greatest detective had no clue it was the fear toxin and not reality. Some of these plot points they decided to go with makes Batman look like he has the intelligence of one of the thugs he beats up. He's just a lot smarter than the game made him look at times. But on the flip side, while it initially seemed that the Joker was forced into the story, I think he's the best part about it. The whole thing with how his story is wrapped up and seeing how his biggest fear is being forgotten was really compelling. As previously mentioned, Joker's return was really controversial, but I think the game perfectly handled it and gave his character a great send-off incorporating him into the whole theme of fear. Also, Batman having his identity revealed to the whole world and that being the reason the Batman died honestly made sense, and they sent off his character really well too. The true ending doesn't give a definitive answer to what happened to him, and I kinda like that. You just see him take out some enemies using the fear toxin, but they don't explain it more than that. And Scarecrow turned out to be an amazing villain, and I loved how his story was concluded. You don't get a boss fight, but Batman becoming fearless after letting go to the Joker and then giving Scarecrow a taste of his own medicine was pretty cool. I don't know how to feel about the fact that you have to do a bunch of side missions to get the true ending, because I feel like the average player will just search it up on YouTube, but it was still a good ending. I like the ending for the most part, but the Barbara Gordon and Arkham Knight parts are pretty disappointing and didn't make a whole lot of sense. But how well does Knight's side content hold up? For me, Arkham City has some of the best side missions in any game I've ever played, so my expectations for Knight were definitely high. And overall, it's good, but not great. There's a lot more checklist type missions where you're doing the same task over and over rather than quality content. There's definitely still some bangers like the Professor Pig stuff. It's a really cool murder mystery that slowly puts the pieces together until you eventually find him, and to nobody's surprise, he's a complete psycho, and it felt pretty satisfying to put him behind bars. Also, the Heir to the Cowl side mission where a man named Azrael claims that he has the ability to replace Batman once he's gone, and Batman actually considers it, giving him a bunch of trials to test if he's worthy or not. And the ending was actually really interesting, where Batman finds out that Azrael had just been completely brainwashed by this cult, and he has to make the decision to try and kill Batman or not. And lastly, Man-Bat comes to mind because he nearly made me shit myself the first time he jump scared me on the rooftop. There's some cool investigation missions that lead to a pretty sad story of this man who is running an experiment and it goes completely wrong and he accidentally kills his wife, and then later on Batman brings it back to his normal self and he's crushed by the news. All three of these side missions provide some really good story, but in Arkham City, damn near every side mission was memorable and brought something new to the table. And while Knight has a lot more busy work style side content, there are still some great missions to be found. I've always loved how they did the Riddler trophies in the series. They take what normally would be boring collectibles and make them interesting, where you have to solve a puzzle to unlock each one. The trophies here aren't nearly as annoying as they are in Arkham City, and the boss fight they give for the Riddler is actually satisfying after he made you suffer the entire game. This is still pretty high quality for extra content. Over 10 years later, it still holds up, but there's a lot more busy work. And considering the big payoff for taking down the militia is a half-baked fight with Deathstroke, it doesn't feel like a lot of it is worth your time. Knight provides a ton of post-launch content, but it doesn't follow the typical DLC format you're used to. Normally when a game adds DLC, they're these big story expansion packs, but instead Knight has combat challenge maps, races, and a shit ton of new suits. And then on top of all that, there's a bunch of story DLCs that are mostly really short, but each one of them lets you play as a different character, which was really cool. There's Red Hood, Harley Quinn, Nightwing, Robin, Catwoman, and even a longer Batgirl DLC that takes place before the events of the series. And of course there's even more Batman, with a few short missions focusing on Mad Hatter, Mr. Freeze, Killer Croc, and Ra's al Ghul, each wrapping up their stories. There's a ton of stuff to do, but if I'm being honest, the only ones that truly stuck out story-wise was the Batgirl DLC, the Mr. Freeze mission that wraps up his story in a cool way, and Red Hood, simply because Red Hood is just a straight Chad. The Batgirl DLC was by far the best DLC the game has to offer and was a phenomenal short story. It shows Batgirl before she gets paralyzed, and ironically enough, she's going after the Joker, who would eventually paralyze her. Robin and Harley Quinn are also here, and I really like how the expansion was structured. It takes place in the Joker's funhouse, where Commissioner Gordon and a bunch of other officers have been taken hostage, and you have to rescue them through a series of games, stealth, and combat sequences, and eventually you get a Joker and Harley boss that was really cool. It feels like an episode of Batman the Animated Series, and I really enjoyed it. The game doesn't have a bad expansion per se, but none of them quite reach the quality of the Batgirl one. And I will admit that all the new suits the game gives you really adds to the game's customization, but I honestly prefer the format they use in Arkham City. Instead of giving a bunch of 10-minute mediocre DLCs, they give a couple really strong ones. But regardless, Knight does provide a lot of content, and it was definitely cool playing as other characters. With Arkham Knight, Rocksteady decided to swing for the fences. While they didn't hit a grand slam, they still provided one of the most unique superhero experiences of all time. The game has a ton of flaws between the disappointing boss fights, the Batmobile being too involved, and the story having some head-scratching decisions. Honestly, I still love the game for how innovative it is. The combat, stealth, and traversal were honestly perfect, and I still think this is a great conclusion for the Dark Knight story. And there's a ton of quality content outside the story to keep you busy, even if some of it was lacking. There's still some really strong side content, DLCs, suits, combat challenges, and races to do once the credits roll. The game is over 10 years old now and is still heavily talked about. Rocksteady could have so easily just played things safe and provided an Arkham City Part 2, but they had the balls to completely reinvent the gameplay and provide a big cinematic story that pissed a lot of people off, but also saw millions of fans love the game. But that's going to be all for this video. If you enjoyed, leave a like and let me know what you think in the comments below. I'll see y'all next time.